Hello? No, look back over here. Things are a bit shit right now, hey. You want to hear about how wholesome Skyward Sword is? Come on, let's go.
The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword occupies a strange place in the hearts of Zelda fans. For many, it's the most frustrating experience they've had with the series, with countless gamers oppressed by its overly linear structure, empty overworld, and clunky motion controls. But even these genuine flaws can't obfuscate that this game is brimming with bittersweet charm. 14-year-old me was so emotionally ruined by the ending that I wrote about the characters in an assignment about grief. I've been thinking a lot about what made Skyward Sword so captivating to me, so I want to try and get a bird's eye view of what's going on in this story.
Good birdie!
Our protagonist is propelled out of his normal life, away from a place that was his entire world, to explore a dangerous wilderness created by a civilization-ending event. The landscape is completely unfamiliar, devoid of the people and systems he's lived with until now. He faces overwhelming foes within the bones of a once thriving society. I'm sure you're starting to see the pattern here too. Skyward Sword fits quite snugly in the post-apocalypse genre, though there's a glaring difference in tone compared to genre staples like Fallout, Mad Max, and basically anything with zombies in it. I'm also going to say post-apoc from here on, because I think we can all agree that 5 syllables is too many. Post-apoc stories tend to be dark, gritty, and laser-focused on destruction and cruel, stupid humans. Yet Skyward Sword, despite taking place after a genocide by demons, creates a lush and optimistic tone. In fact, Wind Waker with its flooded Hyrule and Breath of the Wild with its wild also depict a light-hearted vision of the end of the world. I want to examine how Skyward Sword and its fellows subvert the tropes of the post-apoc genre, and how these subversions capture the dauntless, hopeful heart of the Zelda series. One of the most overexplored themes in post-apoc stories is that despite how hostile the environment is, other people are our biggest threat. We're the real monsters and all that jazz. Of course, these are narratives about being thrust into a world where the rules no longer matter, which is fertile ground for this motif. Humans are indeed well known for being awful to each other, especially when consequences are stripped away. People facing the bubonic plague would leave their infected loved ones to die alone in their own filth. And just the other day, I wore a new sweater, and no one told me it was cute. But honestly, I don't think any of us are all that excited for the apocalypse anyway, so this theme just ends up hanging over the genre like a dark cloud. Even in stories that do involve compassionate characters, their positive actions are often in spite of humankind's cruelty, or they'll eventually be hardened by trauma. So, even though this theme is valid and in line with how humans often behave, I think we could all benefit from seeing a little more unselfish goodness. After all, humans are social creatures, and we have to rely on each other to keep ourselves and our society functioning. Lord of the Flies is the quintessential man is cruel novel, where shipwrecked schoolboys become brutal and animalistic, exploiting and killing each other. Yet when 6 boys were for realsies marooned on an island in the 1960s, they created a roster for gardening, cooking, and standing watch. They made a guitar from coconuts, salvaged wood and wire. They even risked their lives to save one of their number who fell down a cliff and broke his leg. All 6 survived to be rescued more than a year later, and Skyward Sword shines a light on this kind of camaraderie that many post-apoc stories neglect. Mad Max Fury Road has literal convoys full of enemies, and everyone in The Last of Us 2 is morally just the worst. Yet in Skyward Sword, there are really only 2 speaking characters who give Link any trouble. Granted, Girahim has enough personality and pizzazz for 100 bad guys, but he's nonetheless outnumbered by the countless friendlies Link encounters, from the Mogma mole people and the classic Gorons to an especially fashionable Impa. Yes, obviously not all of these characters are human, but these helpful, emotive creatures function as human-like communities that peacefully coexist, despite the collapse of previous social structures. Many of these characters are essential parts of Link's journey. Ucha gives Link the slingshot, a tool he can't progress without, and Gorko helps Link activate the bird statues to let him fast travel and move between surface and sky. The game could have easily hinged on a single positive relationship, like Booker and Elizabeth in BioShock Infinite, or Ellie and Joel in The Last of Us. Maybe Zelda could have left hints and tools for Link as she makes her pilgrimage. Instead, Skyward Sword makes its allies not only abundant, but kind and readily helpful, reinforcing that altruism can prevail even after the end of the world. Even Groose, who starts off as a Draco-esque bully, learns to selflessly help Link. In a redemption arc that rivals that of Prince Zuko, his goodness increases alongside the stakes, challenging the idea that humans will abandon their values when faced with their own mortality. Skyward Sword discards the assumptions post-apoc stories make about human nature, instead championing our potential for kindness and emphasizing the fact that we can and must depend on each other. Skyward Sword's friendly cast of characters also enhances the surface world's welcoming, exciting allure. Each new landscape is filled with new people for Link to meet, and in turn to learn things from. Traditional post-apoc environments are usually characterized as something to survive, or a tool with which to survive. The irradiated wastelands of Mad Max and Fallout threaten to mutate and kill people for just daring to exist, and the family in A Quiet Place uses natural resources like sand and water to protect themselves from sound-detecting monsters. Of course, Link meets obstacles on the surface too, and must survive against enemies like bokoblins and juicy toad avocados, using the landscape and any resources he can scavenge. This means standard post-apocs and Skyward Sword alike are set in places that can be a tool to defeat or avoid enemies. However, a difference lies in the fact that the surface world's primary purpose isn't to be survived, but to be explored. It's common in video games for new items or upgrades to make progress easier, but the nature of the Zelda formula means that these tools are essential to moving forward. Link must traverse each new location before discovering some new mechanic or item that allows him to progress. The uniqueness of these environments, from volcano cave to prehistoric sea, fortifies this sense that before Link is a whole new collection of secrets to unlock. The landscape's potential for learning and growth is underpinned by the fact that Link is tackling all of this as a one-man army. In other post-apoc worlds, it's dangerous for humans to simply exist, and they're constantly on the brink of annihilation. But in Skyward Sword, and even Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild, it's clear that humans can peacefully exist in these worlds. There are islands with flourishing communities, explorers other than Link who get by fine on their own, and at the end of Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda decide to stay on the surface indefinitely. Considering this is the first game in the timeline, it's clear they were able to safely integrate into that environment. These games show us the post-apoc terrain through a lens of potential and creation, rather than a manifestation of loss, hazard, and destruction. When life doesn't work out quite how we want, we can become firmly rooted in the first stage of grief, denial, hoping or pretending that life has an undo button. While some post-apoc stories like Planet of the Apes and Fallout don't put much effort towards changing the current state of things, they don't really have a way to. But when there is a way to abandon this ended, changed world and return to or rebuild the past, characters will become fixated on this possibility. Virus-based zombies might be halted with a cure, Rick and Morty might jump timelines after ruining pretty much everything, and the Avengers can just whip up a time machine to defeat Thanos, I guess. This renders the post-apoc environment less a place and more a purgatory, a liminal space between the death of the world and the rebirth of society, which the characters must endure before they can move on to the next phase. Despite having access to time travel, the goal in Skyward Sword is never to undo what has already happened. Link doesn't travel back in time to kill tiny baby Demise before he randomly decides to commit genocide. Instead, he protects the world in its current state, preventing Demise's resurrection. The surface world isn't some corrupted, temporary state that our hero has to overcome or replace. It's a whole new world in its own right, filled with life and people who seem to be doing pretty well for themselves. The same can be said of Breath of the Wild. The Sheikah technology that powers time stones, and arguably the time gates, is still prevalent and functional in this game. Yet finding a way to travel back and undo Hyrule's destruction is never really considered. Wind Waker Link takes this a step further, explicitly preventing Ganondorf from restoring Hyrule to its former glory, in favor of protecting the cultures now thriving on the Great Sea. Each of these games values and preserves the world as it is now. The grass is green enough here, so why not accept this change and move forward? With kind, cooperative communities and a world that compels Link towards growth and adventure, Skyward Sword presents its post-apoc landscape as something worth saving, not defeating. Alongside Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild, it evokes the mechanic of cycles at the core of the Zelda universe. Skyward Sword marks the beginning of a cycle at the foundation of all subsequent Zelda narratives. Once defeated, the Demon King Demise curses the world Link has saved, so that the embodiment of his hate will come back again and again to enact his vengeance. In the Japanese version of Hyrule Historia, this curse of reincarnation is described with the word rinne. This is the Japanese expression for the Buddhist concept of samsara, an endless cycle of death and rebirth fueled by karma. For the rest of time, or thereabouts, a great evil will always arrive. But a girl with the blood of the goddess and a boy with the soul of the hero will in turn always rise to defeat him. These games don't treat their apocalypses as the end, because in reality, it's not. Our own world has already faced several apocalypses, from the dinosaur-ending meteor to a handful of ice ages, and God knows how many other prehistoric events that we can't even begin to imagine. Yet here we are today. Life continues on, landscapes evolve, and the cycle of life continues in perpetuity. Things will die, things will grow, and good will rise up against evil every time. It's a much nicer sentiment than humans are monsters, don't you think? Thank you so much for watching. I'm just going to ignore how long it's been since my last upload, but I do have something quite exciting and big in the works, so make sure you like and subscribe if you don't want to miss out on that. I promised myself I wouldn't play Skyward Sword HD until I got this video up, so I'm going to go download that, and I don't want anyone to speak to me for 5 days. See you later.